Welcome to the party. I'm Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. Luke Braun is gone, which means we'll be holding a Luke Braun roast.
Hey, fantastic. I love that for me and also for all of you who do not have to suffer from Luke Braun. I'm Arif Hasan from the Wide Left Substack.
Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Vikings talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. It's time for the Minnesota Football Party.
Welcome in. It's a brand new week on Locked On Sports Minnesota. It's the Minnesota Football Party. My name's Sam Ekstrom, executive producer here at Locked On Sports Minnesota, joined by Wide Left's Arif Hasan. Welcome in, Arif. We are out Lukes. We are Lukeless today. Luke Inman is Luke Inman is TBD. Luke Braun is gallivanting in parts unknown on his honeymoon. Congrats to him on the nuptials. But we're going to hold the fort down today and rant about the Vikings offensive line. We'll get into Vikings top bubble guys on the 90-man roster and revisit the 2022 NFL draft. Plus, FanDuel has win totals on the NFC North. Arif, no peeking unless you already have. I'm going to make you guess them heading into the 2024 season. But today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. If you have a competitive side, you got to be a big fan of Monopoly Go. It's the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store and Google Play. And please subscribe to Locked On Sports Minnesota, by the way. We thank you for watching us live or on demand on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel or check us out on the Locked On Vikings podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts, and that could include the Sirius XM app. All right, Arif Hasan, you missed last Thursday. You had teeth surgery. Hope you're doing well. Are you doing well? Please tell me you're doing
pretty well. No,
You're
I'm doing
speaking
well.
very clearly. You're enunciating impeccably. But we got into some conversations about the roster, about bubble players, about areas that are weak, areas that are strong. And the offensive line is where I want to start today, because I think it's maybe the one area aside from, and I guess you could say interior offensive line, interior defensive line would be the two areas that feel somewhat unaddressed. And I want to focus on the offensive side of the football, because this has been a trend going back to the Spielman days, whether it's Nick Easton, whether it's Oli Udo, whether it's Dakota Dozier. The Vikings have an annoying habit of internal promotions that go badly. And it seems like that's the direction they're headed this year. Right now, the starting guards are Blake Brandel and Ed Ingram. The depth is Dan Feeney and Michael Juergens. It's not a wealth of depth, especially on the interior offensive line. And your starting center is Garrett Bradbury, who I'm not sure that anybody is sold on yet. I think we've settled into a place where we are comfortable with his averageness, is the best way I can put it. Have the Vikings mailed in the offensive line this year? Or are you, Arif Hasan, who I think in the past have been fairly anti-guard or don't invest in guard kind of philosophy? Where are you standing in that regard?
I mean, I think that there's a good middle ground that you can strike between ignoring the position entirely and over-investing in it. I think that there's something that you can do about that, and I think that the Vikings have landed on the wrong side of that. I will say this, I guess, sort of in defense of Spielman, is that there were a couple of times that they seem to have nailed down that position, and it just evaporated, right? Like Brandon Fusco had just a phenomenal 2013. What a wonderful player he was then. And then he got a pectoral injury and just never returned to form. Mike Harris, when they moved him from tackle to guard, I was like, what a terrible move. I can't believe he would do that. And he was astounding. He was so good at guard. And then he had a brain bleed that forced him to retire from football. Just stuff like that. So sometimes, hey, we got Joe Berger and Mike Harris. This is going to
Joe Berger, who was like unbelievable, but he didn't get his chance until he was like 35 and then retired.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, this is going to work out. And then it doesn't. So I will say that here, though, I am shocked. So obviously Blake Brandel played really well for the Vikings as a sixth offensive lineman, but we've seen in the past that doesn't necessarily translate to playing well at guard, especially because if you're playing as like an attached tight end, you're essentially playing closer to a tackle position than you are a guard position. So having him play guard, which I know that's what he was last year, that's what he trained at last year, is I think a little short-sighted if that's going to be your only plan. Now, of course, they could have an undrafted free agent compete for the position. I feel like that's or I guess a seventh round pick. They could have a seventh round pick like Jurgens compete for the position, but that's like that's not like a plan, that's a hope, right? So I think that while I don't think the Vikings should invest a first or a second round pick in a guard, I don't think that they should pay for the top guard on the market or anything like that. They should find a starting capable guy or a guy that they're reasonably confident has the ability to start. And the Vikings didn't have a ton of picks in this year's draft. We've had that discussion a little bit, but one of the consequences of that is that you don't have a second or third round pick, and I think ideally third round is where you'd select some of these guys. You don't have a third round pick to grab a guard that could potentially compete for a starting spot next to last year's backup guard and also the seventh round pick that you have from this year, and also maybe an undrafted free agent like Doug Nestor or something like that. So, I think that the Vikings kind of mishandled this position. It was it was like a very calculated move in order to maximize their ability to add in pass rush, and maybe having as much pass rush opportunity as you have available to you is going to make up for, not having, an ideal player at the guard position. And
Mhm.
you could maybe make but I feel like the marginal gains you're adding in pass rush versus the huge deficit you have at guard at some point, that's not worth it. Because I know pass rush is more important, edge rush is more important than guard abstractly. But here, I think we're at an extreme case where maybe you should have invested a little bit less in pass rush and a little bit more in guard.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that we might be judging it a little too early as well. I think that there's still every possibility that the Vikings add to this position. Now, if it's not Reisner, and we tend to agree, I think, on this show that the ship has sailed, that there's not going to be a coming together of terms with Reisner after the way things went down. He's curiously still available. There are other names available. I don't know if any of them are particularly inspiring. Most guard free agents in the month of May are not.
Right.
So the Vikings could be rolling with this. And I guess if it's an organizational philosophy that Kwesi is just never going to invest at the guard position, like, I guess I almost respect it if he's just saying, nope, we don't care. We like our charts or our spreadsheets tell us that this is not going to affect winning enough to justify the cost. I guess I can get on board, but it's going to be frustrating if the offensive line takes a step back after you had Ezra Cleveland in the building last year. You had Dalton Reisner in the building last year. And you could have chosen one of those two and kept them around, and you didn't. And you're relying on a swing guy to fill in at left guard. And we don't know what Ed Ingram is. Like, do we think that Ed Ingram has turned a corner, or could the Vikings be deficient at both guard spots? I think the end of last year, Arif, encouraging for Ingram. But again, that's a player that is still probably on that young rookie contract roller coaster where you aren't entirely sure what you're getting.
Yeah, no, I think that that's fair. I think that that's a good way to characterize Ingram. I think that probably it'll be fine, but there's enough uncertainty there for you to wonder why, plans haven't been made to make sure that you've got as many opportunities to succeed at the position as possible. I would actually be surprised if Kwesi had that approach in terms of positional value, because it doesn't seem like that's actually an important consideration for him, positional value. We talk about him being an analytics GM, but kind of the way that the public analytics movement has talked about roster building has been very different than the way that he has gone about building this roster, right? Like, he may have an approach that matches, what internally the Cleveland Browns and the San Francisco 49ers and maybe even the Philadelphia Eagles, who he's always been kind of in contact with, understand to be like a good analytical roster building, but that doesn't mean that it matches our understanding. It may just mean that positional value is not a conversation starter for him, right? Because, he invested a pick into a kicker, right? They've spent a little bit at running back. They're comfortable doing that, right? It feels like positional, a second tight end, right? Like they paid a lot of money for that guy, right? It feels like positional value is just not that important. And to them, it's more about, is this a potential game-changing player? And so they decided to like trade for TJ Hawkinson because they thought he could be a potential game-changing player, despite the fact that he's a tight end, right? They decided that they wanted to have 3-4 pass rushers. They wanted to invest in a nose tackle in Harrison Phillips, right? Like I think that it's more about seeing if they can, if a player to them can solve a problem on the field than it is anything else. So I don't think it's about, hey, this guard position is just not that valuable. I think it's more that they saw opportunities elsewhere, really. Like, I think if they had an opportunity to draft a Quentin Nelson, they would seriously consider it. Like, I think that's like where that franchise is at. And I respect that too, because it's a consistent organizational philosophy that has its own kind of backing. I don't agree with it, but I understand kind of where it comes from. And honestly, the positional value nerds are probably wrong about Quentin Nelson. He in terms of like wins above replacement, PFF has done the math on this. He's one of the most valuable offensive linemen in the NFL, even after he's had 2 down seasons. So it is possible for a guard to be that valuable. Zach Martin is that valuable. It's just less likely, right? But that's not how they don't think about it. Like, this position is less likely to produce a game-changing player. They think about it in terms of this player is a game-changing player, which I think has guided a lot of the ways that they've approached this. The reason that they would trade up for Dallas Turner at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if the positional value kind of roster building methodology has been not shattered, but broken down a little bit by as you described. Some of the most successful teams in the league don't go about it that way. They kind of zigged when the rest of the league zagged, similar to how the Timberwolves zigged and went big when the rest of the league was going small. And the Lions 2 years ago or 2 drafts ago, they drafted all the wrong positional value spots.
All of them. Running backs, linebackers, tight ends.
They just got great players, and they solved problems. Like you said, they replaced TJ Hawkinson with Sam Laporta. They got a safety who was highly impactful. They got a running back who was highly impactful, and they filled puzzle pieces that roster was missing. And I think in some way, the lines have been blurred as to like what the correct quote unquote way is to build out that roster. But the Vikings, I think they seem to have their eyes wide open that, yep, we're not going to be quite as talented at these given spots. We're going to try to do it the value way. And I'm sure all teams have to make those decisions and say, all right, we're going to spend here, and we're going to have to ham and egg it, at the interior defensive line, interior offensive line. I wish that over the cap broke down positional spending by guard, because they have offensive line, which gets thrown off by Bradbury contract, O'Neal contract. Guard spending has got to be like nothing. I mean, they're paying a rookie contract to Ingram. They're paying a $3 million per year to Brandel, rookie contract to Juergens, minimum to Feeney. And that's and then the UDFAs. I mean, it really is about as bare bones as you can get at the guard position. And if they get something out of them at that cost, then it turns into great team building, I guess. So you can look at it a couple different ways. Let's talk more roster when we come back. I want bubble guys from you, Arif Hasan, your top few bubble guys looking at the roster right now as we stand, and later on we'll revisit the 2022 draft class and do FanDuel win totals on the Minnesota Football Party. We are brought to you today by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and MLB's in full swing too. FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. You're going to want to tune into the Ron Johnson show tomorrow, by the way, and hear about his parlay effort over the weekend. It is quite a beat, and you'll hear about it tomorrow. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. $150. Bet on the spreads, the money lines, the player props, and more. You can spread it around however you want at FanDuel. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every playoff shot count, whether it's basketball, hockey, or otherwise. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And thanks again for watching us live here on the Minnesota Football Party. Myself, Arif Hasan, talking Vikes. Leave your comments and questions. We can try to get to those later in the show. Just drop them in the chat. We're watching it. We appreciate all the engagement. All right, Arif, bubble guys on the 90-man roster. You know, the more bubble guys you have, typically, I think it reflects good depth. If you feel like there are a lot of bubble guys, it probably means you have some positions that are jam-packed with possibilities. And I think this team is moderately deep. I don't think they're extremely deep. I to be honest with you, I struggled to come up with more than about 5 notable bubble guys. Maybe more will emerge as we see young players step up. But give me a couple of yours that you're circling. Maybe there's a couple surprises in there as well. But who do you think are the top bubble guys on the Vikings roster?
I kind of want to go. Usually, when we have these conversations, we always start with offense. I want to start with the defense a little bit. I think that the twos, Andre Carter II and Pat Jones II, I think are potential bubble guys, right? You know, Carter, I think, barely made the roster last year. Pat Jones has been okay as a rotational guy, but they bring in. So obviously they lose Hunter, they bring in Grenard, but they also, in addition, bring in, you know, Andrew Van Ginkel, and they bring in Dallas Turner. And so, you know, there's still room for Pat Jones, but he's going to have to beat out Andre Carter and vice versa. And you've got an undrafted free agent and Gabe Murphy that, you know, people think is, you know, a quality player that is in the same spot that Andre Carter was in last year as an edge player who's highly ranked by, you know, draft analysts, as you can see by the consensus big board. Probably comes in with a fairly high guaranteed dollar number, just like Carter did. But you know, that's then, this is now, right? And Carter is going to be competing against somebody that has a high regard as an undrafted free agent. Is going to be competing against somebody that has a ton of snaps, and Pat Jones. Pat Jones is going to have to compete with the fact that he hasn't had an enormous impact on the field. So I think that fifth edge rusher position, fifth edge rusher position, that's gonna matter a lot. And you know, maybe you could throw in Jihad Ward in there too. Depends on what position.
Yeah, I was gonna bring him up. That's the guy that no one has once talked about, because no one's ever heard of him. He's basically just an immaculate grid answer. He's been all over the place. Turns 30 this week, but he's got 18 career sacks and a career high 5 last season with the Giants. We could be sleeping on Jihad Ward. Now, there almost annually is a veteran that gets brought in and isn't even really a factor. I mean, gets buried on the third team right away and is basically just
your Kendall Wrights.
Yeah. Your Kendall Wrights. And the Vikings had one a couple of years ago whose name escapes me. But this does happen quite a bit. I mean, the linebacker, Gruger Hill this year feels like that's kind of along the same vein. These are role players on their previous teams, and the Vikings are probably going to side with a rookie or young player over them. But I think, to your point, that, you know, a player like that probably threatens the path of Andre Carter. And I would say too, Arif, that like the Vikings have brought in a lot of pricey UDFAs over the years, especially at edge. Have any of them really worked out? You know, like there's been a lot of exciting names, and that's what worries me about Gabe Murphy too, is that we get these gleams in our eyes over these UDFAs at times, and a lot of the time it's really all just talk. We never actually see it come to fruition on the field.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because you know, it's like a UDFA, right? But and I forget, was Kenny Willekes a 7th rounder or a UDFA? But it felt like he
might have been a 7.
Yeah.
Who was the LSU guy? I want to say.
Oh my gosh.
4 or 5
Deshaun
years
Bowers.
Ago.
Yeah.
Deshaun Bowers. Yeah.
Yeah. So Deshaun Bowers, and then I remember spring league guy Carter Schultz. You know, you bring these guys in that have like an impressive, for the position that they're in, you know, 4th, 5th string, have an impressive resume, and then, like you say, they don't really pan out in a way. I mean, Bowers stuck on the roster for
Luigi Villain was
Villain, right,
had a minute, you know, but never really amounted to anything.
Yeah. So, that happens every so often. I just feel like, if you continue taking shots there, something will emerge, and that's fine. It has happened at other positions for the Vikings, whether it's receiver or returner or fullback, right? And that's fine, right? But I think that, um, knowing that that's the case could temper our expectations, but it shouldn't allow us to like count out a guy entirely as potentially, earning a pretty big spot, because at some point that could happen. But yeah, I think that as excited as we were about Andre Carter last year, obviously it was Ivan Pace who made a bigger impact. As excited as we were about, Luigi Villain, as excited as we are about Gabe Murphy, probably these guys are not going to, at least in year one, have a significant impact. And I don't know that there's a path for them to have a significant impact with the way that the Vikings have managed that side of the roster, adding so many edge rushers that are slated to have so much playing time. And like you said, there's some other additional obstacles in the way where you don't know how big of an obstacle Jihad Ward is, right? But it is possible. But like, it does put somebody like Andre Carter or even Pat Jones on notice, right? That this could
Yes.
that this could be the end of their Vikings career, or they could be a practice squatter for the foreseeable future. So, yeah, I think it's like an interesting scenario. It'll be kind of a fun battle to watch in camp. I think that there's a lot of potential for roster movement among, those 3-4 guys to be kind of the primary backup, because I assume for now Dallas Turner is going to be kind of like a designated pass rusher, heavy rotational guy, with Andrew Van Ginkel probably playing, at least at the beginning of the year, more snaps. Maybe he could just take over after a while. But I think but those three are the rotation, right? And then who else gets to be involved in that rotation will be the rest of the battle. And you either are going to see a fair amount of snaps, or you could just see the practice squad. I think that that's an interesting kind of bubble battle there.
The guy that Luke Braun does not seem to like or thinks is a veteran bubble guy, Shaq Griffin. He's mentioned that a couple times. He thinks Shaq is going to be on the bubble, and he's at a position where the Vikings are, I think, on the deeper side. We laid out last week when you were gone that you've got 7 corners, including Najee, because of special teams, that could conceivably make this roster. A lot of it depends on Andrew Booth's progress. Is Shaq Griffin in any kind of peril in your mind? I think no. I think that he's on this team. What say you?
I think he's a bubble guy. I wrote him down as somebody that is going to have to watch for it. I think this is like, a Kendall Wright situation, right? Where it's like somebody you bring in that has, a decent amount guaranteed. Was it like $4 million guaranteed, but not enough for you to say that he's guaranteed a spot based off the contract numbers alone. Has a pretty reasonable resume that, based off of the resume, you think, hey, this guy should be, in the rotation or nearly starting, just like Kendall Wright. But, there's a reason that, he was available. I mean, this is Shaq Griffin's 4th team, right? It was like Seattle, and then 2 NFC South teams, or AFC NFC South teams. And he was like benched for a little bit. I mean, there's this whole deal, right? So it is possible that this guy is not going to make the roster, and it really depends on the progress of players like Andrew Booth. It depends on the progress of players, like maybe even a Caleb Evans, the progress of him. But also, you've got, Joanne Williams from last year, who was in a somewhat similar-ish position. Resume wasn't quite as good, but, his former 2nd-round pick that had 1 or 2 good years with New England, knows the defense, comes in. And, I think initially Joanne Williams didn't make the roster. It was like they'd added him back, something like that. But like, it could be a very similar situation, and maybe Joanne Williams outcompetes Shaq Griffin. That would not be my expectation, but it wouldn't surprise me. And I think that you're taking a look at, this whole roster. You see there's a couple of slot guys like Blackman, but there's a lot of outside guys, right? And so if Griffin isn't a slot player, which in my eyes he's not, he played slot very briefly and it didn't go well for him in the NFL, then, where are we putting him? Is Byron Murphy kicking inside? I know that the Vikings have mentioned that as a potential plan. But you've got, on the outside, you've got a Caleb Evans in 2 cornerback sets. Obviously, it's Byron Murphy, but you've got Andrew Booth, right? You've got Joanne Williams, who's, only ever going to play on the outside. And then in the slot, you've got potentially Jay Ward, who is primarily a safety, but has played nickel. Obviously, Mickey Blackman. And then you've got Kyrie Jackson, who's obviously going to be on the outside. So, it's really a question of how they want to build the roster or where they think that they can fit somebody like Griffin. And if Jackson is definitely making the team, and as a 4th-round pick, there's a really good chance he does. It's about like 1 in 64-ish 4th-round picks get cut as rookies. So pretty good chance that Kyrie Jackson makes the team, right? Good chance that really good chance, obviously, that Caleb Evans makes the team. So it's really just between Andrew Booth, Jawan Williams, Shaq Griffin for a 4th outside cornerback spot, which is good to have, but is not a guarantee. So I do think that there's the possibility that Shaq Griffin doesn't make the team.
I don't hate having a bench piece that has a track record like Shaq Griffin. I would rather have that on the bench if he would tolerate it. Again, maybe he wouldn't. The track record suggests that he's interested in being a starter, and he may not gel immediately with if he doesn't see eye to eye. But I think Andrew Booth as your insurance versus Shaq Griffin, I'd lean on Shaq, especially when you're not really recouping, I think, much money. It's $3.9 million guaranteed on that deal. I tend to think that he is favored to make the roster, Andrew Booth, and probably Lewis Cine, probably on the bubble. Between those two, who do you think is more likely to hang on with the Vikes this year?
Between Griffin and Cine?
No, Booth and Cine.
Oh,
same draft class.
Between Booth and Cine, I guess Booth. He's seen the field more consistently. He actually played somewhat well last year after struggling for a little bit. The primary issue for him has been injury, whereas though Cine obviously suffered a catastrophic injury his rookie year, the primary issue for him is not actually that injury. It's his capacity to see the field at all. They played Theo Jackson ahead of him. That to me is a really huge signal. Theo Jackson played well. I don't want to knock him, but that's a pretty your practice squad undrafted guy is I guess he wasn't originally an undrafted free agent for the Vikings, but he's undrafted for the Titans or something. Your practice squad guy is ahead of your 1st-round pick. That says a lot, I think, about your 1st-round pick. Booth has seen the field, and the Vikings have trusted him to do things. And he has, this last year at least, paid back some of that trust. That has not been the case for Cine. So I think that Booth has a much better chance, despite the fact that the competition at safety is much weaker. I think that Booth has a much better chance of making the roster than Cine. I think they would rather have, despite what they did last year, would rather have 4 safeties if they had to make a decision, if that meant the difference between having Booth or Cine on the roster.
I've got one more name written down. Kene Nwangwu, entering his contract year, man, time flies, in 3 years as a pro. And I think every year, we were saying, oh, this guy's going to be this is going to be a key piece of the running game. Injuries have been problematic for him. That's not great. But do you want to guess his career carry count in 3 seasons?
Carry count.
Yeah.
Actually, I was going to say 15. That actually seems high. But let's go with 15.
You actually undershot it.
Oh, great. Good for him.
27.
I was too close. That's not good.
3.3 yards per carry, not great. Small sample size. Do you want to guess his reception count?
Reception count. I'm going to go with 15 again.
6.
6.
That's 33 touches in 3 years, 11 per year.
That's only 6 more than Dwayne McBride.
Who again is going to compete for depth at running back. So the room this year, and the Vikings are keeping a fullback too, is Aaron Jones on the team, Ty Chandler on the team, and then a competition between Kene, Gaskin, and Dwayne McBride. The kickoff rules. Yep. Could that save Kene Nwangwu if he gets an uptick in opportunities there?
It could. It felt like the Vikings wanted to add some kickoff type bodies too, so it's not as if he's the only returner. I feel like the undrafted free agents include at least 2 guys that seem kickoff return capable. And given the new kickoff rules are so dramatic that the skill set required to return might be different than it used to be at kickoff return. So it might just be if you're good at punt returns, you're good at kick returns, which wasn't always the case. People kind of assumed it was, but there were reasons that we had punt returners and kick returners because they were different skill sets, right? Now, just because the rules have changed so dramatically, the blocking is different, the way you read those blocks are different, where the ball gets received is different, how the ball might get delivered could potentially be different. I don't know. That it might just be a very similar skill. It might not be, I don't know, right? But it might be a very similar skill set. And if that's the case, it might just be that you only have one returner, which the teams that have been able to do that in the past have had a little bit of a roster advantage when you've got somebody who's good at both punt and kick returns, right? And we know, like a Devin Hester, right? But we know that that's relatively rare given, what they ask kickoff returners to do. But now that there's more lateral movement, it might not be Kenne's game. It might be, one of those Mercer guys. I think both of them are probably capable at that kind of play. So I don't know. I feel like that there's going to be, you could have Lucky Jackson back there. You could have, like I said, one of those two Mercer guys back there. They're probably going to try out Brandon Powell back there. Like I said, punt return, kick return might not be all that different. They're going to try and find it out. So I think the new kickoff return rules will make whoever wins that position much more valuable than before. And that person could be Kene Nwangwu, right? But the other side of the new kickoff return rules could be that his skill set no longer transfers as cleanly there as it used to.
Correct. It probably has more running back skills, like reading blocks and operating in tight spaces. Not sure if that's Kenny's cup of tea. We'll find out. Obviously, OTA starts soon. We'll probably get our early reads on who's in that competition. I'm going to ask you a question after this, Arif. Who from the 2022 draft class, Kwesi's first class, will sign a second contract with the Vikings? That's next on the Minnesota Football Party. We're presented today by Monopoly Go. Yes, we got to pause and talk about it again. I know you've heard it before, but there's too many cool features to let you know about with Monopoly Go, where you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments. You can work together, build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. But there's also the oppositional element where you can get hilarious emojis and taunt your friends and smash their buildings and heist their vaults. So you can work together on one hand, or you can just go scorched earth on your buddies and talk some trash with Monopoly Go. I love the options. I love the features that they have, the tournaments, the challenges, the mini games, like robot pachinko machines, whatever those are. You can check them out. You can learn what a robot pachinko machine is. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win, and also rent frenzies. So discover something new with Monopoly Go. Get off the bench. Go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. Back on the Minnesota Football Party, I'm Sam Ekstrom. That's Arif Hasan. Check us out on Locked On Vikings podcast feed. And thanks for watching us on Locked On Sports Minnesota's YouTube channel. Arif, I asked you before the pause, who from the 2022 draft class is going to sign a second contract with the Vikes? And just to refresh everyone's memory, that class includes the two we already discussed, Seenan Booth, Ed Ingram, Brian Asamoah, Caleb Evans, Asezi Otamewo, gone. Ty Chandler still around. Vidarian Lowe, gone. Jalen Naylor, still around. And Nick Muse, still around, right?
Nick Muse, yeah.
Not gone.
Who's also potentially a bubble guy, in addition.
Let me give you a quick clarifier. The deal has to be multi-year. So if it's like returning, if it's returning for
is so funny. That question sounds like a threat given how bad they
are. Machu Meech is going to get some kind of award for like the best engagement in the chat.
This is good.
You're in the gold medal position right now, Macho. Here's my clarifier, Reef. Has to be a multi-year deal. So if it's like a 1 year minimum returning to, I don't know, just bolster their stock or, live at the end of the bench, I'm not counting it. Has to be a multi-year commitment. Is anyone in line, or who is likeliest to sign that deal?
So obviously we have some questions about Ed Ingram, but I think the trajectory he's on would suggest that he would sign a multi-year deal with the Vikings. So I'm going to count him. I think the same is probably true of Ty Chandler. I think this is like a huge year for that, obviously. Um, but I think that he's probably on track for a multi-year deal. Not a huge one, right? But a multi-year deal. I think that his agent's probably, looking at the running back market and saying, he's probably not going to be able to compete for like a great starting job. We'll go where the market's good. And that's probably in Minnesota. I would like it for it to be Jalen Naylor. That seems like a 1-year deal type situation. So I'm gonna skip him for now, but I do think he's on watch to be in a spot where he could earn a multi-year deal. I think Brian Asamoah's gone. He had so much opportunity last year to just be the guy, and they basically handed it to him on a silver platter, and it didn't work out. Obviously, we talked about Lewis Cine gone. Andrew Booth would be interesting, but he seems like a 1-year kind of guy. Caleb Evans multi-year deal. And honestly, I think that though the 2022 draft class is not good, right? It was a poorly executed draft from Kwesi. It is probably not as bad as the perception is, which is not to say the direction of the perception is wrong. It's a bad class, but it's probably not as bad as people think, especially if Jalen Naylor lives up to the potential people were talking about last year before he got injured, right? Especially if Ed Ingram continues to improve. Like it is possible that this class produces contributors, which is, I think, the class producing contributors is beyond the way that people have talked about this class, which is that it is completely dead. It's got nothing in it. But a Caleb Evans could be a regular, valuable starter, right?
Yeah.
Ed Ingram, regular, valuable starter. Which Ed Ingram was the pick I criticized the most, even just for on-field reasons, right? Because he was like 100th on the big board. He's drafted at like 66 or something like that. 60th? Something like that, right?
59th. Yep.
Yeah. And some of the guys we were more excited about. Andrew Booth didn't pan out. Lewis Cine didn't pan out. And I think that's like part of it. But like some of these players will contribute, which is pretty good.
Let's stack it up to Rick Spielman's final class. So going into last year, which was the equivalent, so year 3 of the 2021 draft class, obviously a star in Christian Darrisaw.
Yep.
Beyond that,
Kellen Mond. You're going in order. Okay.
Yeah. We'll get to Cam Bynum. Credit for that pick. But Kellen Mond was gone. Chaz Surratt was gone. Wyatt Davis was gone. Patrick Jones didn't play. Wongwu barely played. We just established that. Janarius Robinson gone. Amir Smith-Marset gone. Zach Davidson gone. Jalen Twyman gone. I don't know how many gones I said there. Probably 70% of that class was not on the team in year 3. I know there was a regime change, but compare that to what we're looking at going into year 3 of this class.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it. Comparing the 2022 to the 2021 class makes the 22 class look good, and now we're going to get to the 23 class.
The retention rate is slightly better. I guess, some could be cut, but I expect most of them to contribute in some way, in some obscure way. So Ed Ingram's a starter. Asamoah, at minimum, it's got to be a special teamer. Evans a starter. Chandler, probably a key rotational offensive piece.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Jalen Naylor, a chance to be wide receiver 3. So if you and Nick Muse, maybe without TJ Hawkinson, could see the field. Like, I think if the best case scenario, the most realistic best case scenario plays out, you could get contributions from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players from that class.
I think the tenor of discussion about these guys heading into this season is better than the tenor of the previous heading into the previous season, right? The way that we talked about the individual players in the class. Ed Ingram, might, continue taking that next step. Caleb Evans could become a reliable starter. I think that we are more optimistic about these players than the way that we talked about the similarly situated players from last year, right? Because Kellen Mond was in the trash, right? We're like, Zimmer's seen enough. Like he's seen everything he needs to see. They're out of quarterbacks. What do you do? What, he's not going to play? And then he immediately throws a pick six or almost a pick six against Green Bay. So we're like, okay, fine. So like the way that we talked about that class last year versus this class this year. Yeah, 2022, a bad draft class compared to the average GM, not good. But better than Rick Spielman's final class. You know, I defend Spielman a lot, but that class was bad.
Really bad. Really bad. Thank you for the, Cam Bynum turned out to be great. Christian Darrisaw. So he cast a very wide net, and he hit on two. Christian Darrisaw, by the way, fifth-year option, obviously.
Darrisaw's elite. That's an important...
Yeah. And that deal, that deal will come to fruition probably a year from now. So he's got that fifth year. That's key. But yeah, the 2021 class, uninspiring. The 2020 class, fairly like how many? Let's see how many of those players. Jefferson hasn't signed his second deal yet. Cleveland got traded. Dantzler got cut. Wanham didn't re-sign. Lynch cut. Dye didn't re-sign.
But Metellus and Brandel.
Metellus is at this point and Brandel. Yeah, you're right. The 2 6th-round picks, the only ones to sign a second deal.
And people have been complaining to me about what has a late round pick ever done? Hey, you're starting guard, starting safety.
We're waiting on you, Jefferson. You got to help out Rick. Make that class look a little better. Re-sign your deal. That's got to be give me your best estimate. Give me a date. What date is this deal getting done with JJ?
I don't think that they'll wait until the beginning of training camp, which would be late July, right? When's OTAs?
Rookie minicamp is Friday, at least the media availability part of it, which means that OTAs would be pretty close to around the corner, because it all culminates with mandatory minicamp, which is in typically mid-June.
Let's say right before OTAs, and then he'll show up, right? And be not it's voluntary, right? And instead of doing endorsement deals in Miami, he'll be here working with the team, trying to get the new quarterbacks on the same page. And he signs a new deal. It's a great storyline. I mean, the way Crazy talked about it, he was like, we didn't want to sign him during the draft to overshadow that. That language suggests it's basically done.
Kwesi doesn't like to speak with a lot of certainty, but that statement held a lot of certainty in it. It implied a lot of certainty. I'm going to say mandatory minicamp, because then
basically 2 weeks apart on this, our predictions.
Yeah, I think so. So if you're setting the over under, I would take the over on later. But I think they would do it a week where he's maybe planning to be there anyway. And then they could, instead of rolling him in for the non-mandatory part, they could have him there for the mandatory part. He only has to take part in a couple practices. And the way the Vikings roll, he's probably not going to run a live route, even if he's signed. I don't think they would risk anything with him. But that's my prediction. So I don't know the exact date of minicamp. I'm going to say June 10th. And that's my official prediction. So in closing today, Arif, have you looked at the FanDuel win total projections?
I have not. I'm glad that you told me not to, because sometimes I prepare for segments during the show.
Right.
And this may have been one that I would have prepared for, but I guess important that I didn't.
I like an unprepared Arif because it means I get your raw, authentic guess. Give me your NFC North win total projections on FanDuel.
I think that probably people are going to be a little bit. Bearish is bad, right? Bearish is negative.
Correct.
Bearish on the Lions relative to the success that they had last year. So, which to me suggests 9.5 wins for the Lions. So that's.
I'll give you the answer. So the Lions are the projected winners of the North at 10.5.
Okay, that was debating between the two. I should have picked 10.
Only 3 teams have a higher number. at 11.5, and those are the Ravens, the 49ers, and the Chiefs. So that is
Okay,
that is
they're
actually a lot
not bearish on them at all. That's
no,
okay.
they would be bullish. And again, the over-unders are always very concentrated in the middle. Like, there's a lot of
Yeah,
good teams
always.
that still are getting 8.5, 9.5 because they don't have they
Well,
don't
that would
go
be like
on
the Eagles, right? Like, or 10.5, 9.5, right?
the Eagles. Let me check. I'm sure they're 10.5.
That's an interesting.
They're 10.5, but there aren't a
Okay,
lot of
good.
teams in double digits, like the Jets with Rodgers are 9.5, for instance. And I could go up and down the list. Let's see, the Dolphins.
Sure.
The Dolphins are 9.5, right?
The Dolphins are 9.5. Okay,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I trust the Dolphins more than I trust the Lions. That's so fascinating. Okay, might be a schedule thing too. Okay, so I went for the Lions first. I think the Packers are the next favorite team. People are pretty high on Jordan Love, but I just feel like the team is still so young. The defense is still kind of an unknown. 8.5 seems way too low. I'll go 9.5 with them.
Ding, ding, ding. Nailed it. 9.5, and more money is coming in on the over.
Okay, well, good luck to them. Good luck to the people betting the over. I'm a Jordan Love hater. That's not fair. But so we'll see. Okay, so I'm guessing the Bears are ahead of the Vikings because of how fragile the Vikings' defensive success seems and how stellar the Bears offseason seems, right? Oh my God, they added so many receivers and this defense is there and they re-signed Jalen Johnson, right? Like that's got to be like a big part. So I'm guessing the Bears are ahead of the Vikings, but I'm guessing it's not like a huge, like I don't think they're in the win. I don't think they're in the above 500. I'm going to guess 7.5 for the Bears.
You missed it by 1. 8.5 for the Bears.
God, that's so high.
Again, a lot of money on the over. And back on the Lions for a second, the money there is on the under. So people are fading the Lions and they're bullish on the Packers and Bears. So we have 10.5, 9.5, 8.5.
8.5
for the Bears.
Oh my God.
Yep. Above 500 or at 5. I guess that is a 500. 8.5 is 500 in a 17-game season. So the Vikings, we've arrived at the Vikings.
If the Vikings announced tomorrow that JJ McCarthy was the starting quarterback, I bet the win total would go up. But they have not done that. And they won't do that because I believe that Sam Darnold will start. I believe most of the betting public also believes that Sam Darnold will start. I think it'd be too easy if it was just like one more win, but 6.5 is such a low total for it. 6.5 is so low for Vegas, or I guess casinos now. Can't call them Vegas anymore. That's so low. I imagine there's not many teams below 6.5, so I'm going to go 7.5, even though it's like a very just so like one win.
And you are correct. It is 7.5. Now, do you want to guess where the money is, over or under?
The money's probably in the under.
You are correct there too. -142 to take the under on the Vikings. So not a lot of faith, Arif, not a lot of faith in the purple. Interesting exercise though. And again,
if I were to, and I don't give gambling advice. I never do. I wouldn't do that. But were I to personally make a decision here, it wouldn't be on the Vikings win total. I'm so agnostic about what that's going to be. But I think there's so much uncertainty in the NFC North that I would take whatever the really long odds are on the Vikings to win the division. I don't think they will, but I bet the odds are out of sync there. And so that's something I'd be willing to take.
Plus 750. It was after the draft. I'm guessing it hasn't moved a lot. Good stuff, Arif. 50 minutes flew by. He's at Arif Hasan NFL. He's at the Wide Left Substack. Subscribe to that. Get great stories and analysis. I'm Sam Ekstrom. Hopefully we have at least one Luke on Thursday. We'll also have Ron Johnson, but a Luke-less episode of the Minnesota Football Party today. We appreciate you watching and listening, and we'll talk to you next time here on Locked On Sports Minnesota. So long.